Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and welcome to the show. My guest this week is Nadia Litz, an actor-turned-filmmaker whose new movie, The People Garden, starts a limited run tonight, Tuesday, May 10th, at the TIFF Bell Lightbox, a month after making its world premiere at the Buenos Aires Film Festival. It's a mood piece about a young woman looking for a lost boyfriend in a creepy Japanese forest. But it's a little more complicated than that. Nadia chose Klute, Alan J. Pakula's 1971 thriller starring Jane Fonda as a New York actress who moonlights as an escort, and Donald Sutherland as a small-town cop who believes she holds the key to a friend's disappearance. At the time, it was seen as a revolutionary work. Fonda won an Oscar for her performance as the complex call girl Bree Daniel, and Andy and David Lewis's script scored a nomination of its own. Didn't win. 4.5 decades later, in the age of CSI and SVU, Klute plays like a conventional studio project commandeered or infected by the American indie revolution, and it's all the more interesting for that. This is someone else's movie. I'm always fascinated by people's choices.
Yeah.
Like everybody, I was going to say everybody surprised me, but just lately it seems to be tipping into either I'm learning to, oh, that makes sense, but this one is a really clear choice because it's it seems, anyway, built around the strong female lead, an incisive psychological drama. This is all your stuff.
I think so. I mean, I'm almost surprised by the choice myself, actually, but okay. Because I wasn't sure what to pick. I went through a couple of things. At the time, I was watching some other Pakula. I was really into All the President's Men, so I almost chose that. But I felt like people had seen that movie, whereas I feel like Klute is still a little undiscovered. It feels like it hasn't been watched by as many people. But you're absolutely right that ultimately I think I respond to it because of this female character. I find her very fascinating, very raw, very real. And, you know, coming from an acting background, I think that I miss that we don't seem to have those kinds of characters anymore. I would love to play, and I know many of my colleagues would love to play a role like this. I just don't think they're built that way anymore.
I wonder. I mean, certainly, like, watching it again, it really struck me how little Sutherland has to do with the film. I mean,
the titular character of Klute is only a side story to her story, really.
You could easily call this film Bree Daniel.
Yeah.
Or Daniels, because her name changes a couple of times.
I mean, I think I've been trying to figure that out since I agreed to do this, is why is it called Klute? And I've done some research. I'm interested in what you think. I don't know if I've come out with a conclusive answer. I have some theories.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hit me by all means. You're the guest. You lead.
Yeah, I mean, one theory that I read, which I thought was quite interesting, was that it's called Klute because this is the story of the moment when this character, Bree Daniels, changes. And we're watching her change. And this theory that I read online from, a reviewer was that Klute is really the inciting incident to that change. And I thought that was kind of an interesting idea, although maybe putting too much power also in the character Klute, that he somehow facilitates her change. Because I think there are a few other factors that might facilitate her change. I also think it's interesting because maybe it's there to, a lot of the reviews that both liked it and didn't like it point out that it's an awkward or an unsuccessful thriller. Mm-hmm. And I really see that as part of the point of the film, that there's these expectations that are kind of built around a thriller story that we are let down as viewers of this movie. They don't quite succeed. It doesn't quite succeed as a thriller. And the idea of a thriller being that this, detective comes in and solves this crime and ties it all up really neatly. And I think by calling it Klute, but then having it not be about him and not about this detective who can actually solve the crime, I think that it really kind of draws attention to that genre itself and maybe can be sort of subversive in its gender politics that way too. I don't know. Those are some things that are just floating around.
I wondered, I mean, my thought is that it was just the easiest way for the studio to give it a title. Like,
it probably
the
is
one-word
that.
title, and this is right after that wave of films like Bullet.
Yes.
And what's the other one? Madigan and all that. Like, just Mitchell, name it for the guy.
But then why not call it Brie?
But why not call it Brie?
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think the reason they went with Klute is just because it's a weird sounding name. Like, it's a, remember there were a couple of other movies that were marketed, they were marketed solely on the idea of, ooh, this is a weird sounding word. Let's find out more.
Yeah.
So Klute is just, well, it sounds...
Well, it succeeds. It's better than calling it Brie. I don't think it would have been as successful had they called it Brie or someone suggested Ms. Daniels, which would have been quite silly. But no, I think it's an intriguing aspect to the film that it's called Klute, but it really isn't about him. I always think it's funny too, because you can analyze these things to death and come up with all of these reasons, and it absolutely could just simply be that the studio found it like a fun, interesting kind of name that had nothing to do with gender politics whatsoever. And I'm reading into that now, but it's a cool aspect for a cool movie, I think. Yeah.
And I wondered too, the other theory I had is that maybe in a film that sort of traffics in paranoia and suspicion and characters who appear to be upstanding and are not, or are entirely upstanding and also awful. I was just trying to figure out if maybe it's supposed to throw suspicion onto Klute himself, because we know it is possible, given the layout and given the whole 70s vibe, which I think Klute was one of the earliest films to really express that kind of cynicism and
towards the
downward spiral of it, and distrust of authority.
Absolutely.
Mistrust. It is entirely possible that John Klute is the killer.
Right.
He's introduced just sitting silently and weird at this great opening
and it's
sequence.
Donald Sutherland.
Yeah,
so.
and it's anybody's guess.
Yeah.
Also, you're seeing Donald Sutherland play straight right after MASH, where he was decidedly not an establishment figure.
Yeah.
Could go either way.
You had pointed out too, because we just also watched the behind the scenes, and he's wearing this fabulous. I had never seen that, and he's wearing this fabulous 70s fashion hat, and looks kind of nothing like he does in Klute. And it is quite an extraordinary performance from him too, playing that straight, because obviously his politics were much more in line with, the image of the 70s Jane Fonda. So it's a good performance by him too. But I think you're absolutely right that that we might think it's Klute, that the killer is Klute, or that even maybe we are supposed to, even though he's not the killer, supposed to distrust him in some way. I was almost rewatching the film this morning when I watched it for this, wondering if that was also part of what we were supposed to have to be thinking about, this idea of this very kind of straight-laced character who then takes this woman and really becomes this, he straightens her out, he cleans her up.
Right.
And, ultimately it's, is it a happy ending, or is it a bit strange that she kind of changes in this way too? I mean, I think it's asking a lot of these deeper questions that, I don't have the answer to. I just enjoy the movie, but
I don't even know. I was trying to figure out how you pitched this in 1970. How people, we take this Canadian and this tabloid hellion that Jane Fonda was in a lot of people's eyes. That's not who she was, but that was the image that was there.
Yeah.
And we put them together in a movie about how awful New York is. And it panders to every Midwestern imaginary heartland audience thing you can think of, but it's also not about what that image is. It's about how the city fails to break Klute, and how she isn't actually broken either. She's just trying to figure out who she wants to be, and there's this ambivalence about the morality that runs through the entire movie that I just find absolutely fascinating, because he's so monotonic. It's not monotony, it's something else.
He barely even says anything too. He doesn't have the dialogue. He's just very straight. Yeah,
even once he's introduced as the presumptive lead, it instantly flips to her in the city and just follows her for 10 or 15 minutes until he catches back up to the story.
Yeah, we don't get to know much about Klute. I mean, we don't get to know much about her either. The idea of backstory in this movie is not there at all.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that. I kind of like that we're meeting them and we're basically made to make these assumptions, probably based on our own preconceived notions too about what each one should be. So I find that really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that little featurette, which is on the Klute DVD, if anybody wants to find it, 8 minutes long, terribly produced. I mean, it's a commercial film. It's come and watch the locations of this movie that you're seeing. But there is a throwaway interview line from Fonda where she explains that she thinks Brie Daniels comes from an upper middle class family and has some college.
I found that really surprising and interesting.
None of it is in the film.
I wondered though, was she given this backstory? Did she make this backstory? Was that in the script and then cut out?
Yeah.
This is not a segue to talk about my own film, I swear, but I just made a film and there was some backstory to my lead character, female character, and it was removed. And I'm wondering how people might respond to that, because I think it's sometimes hard to maybe identify with characters sometimes when you don't know where they're coming from. It's more challenging, certainly, for an audience. And I think in the case of Klute with Brie Daniels, with the Jane Fonda character, that, you know, she's a prostitute who does not have a heart of gold at all.
Yeah.
You know, she's manipulative and very unapologetic. Very fascinating, too, because she wants to be... The only thing we know about her is that she wants to be an actress. We don't have this idea that she went to college. We know she's smart, but I wonder what the reaction to that kind of character was at the time, and if that kind of movie was made today, what would the reaction be? I don't know. What was your reaction?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the first time I saw it, it must have been the late '80s, I guess, and it was just presented as this thriller that was really important, like in the evolution of the Hollywood studio thriller, because right around that same time is this huge upheaval, the new Hollywood and the renaissance of directors making, Bonnie and Clyde and Bob Rafelson emerging, and everybody just doing more naturalistic stuff. And you can see those elements here, but they're almost nailed into the format of an existing genre, which is the straight up thriller. This is basically, like it's a CSI episode now, or a Law and Order episode. It's sex killings plus the one witness.
And yet we don't see any, like for a prostitute movie about sex killings, we don't see any of that gratuity.
Well, it's
not all, really.
Yeah,
like
it's all happened before the movie starts, really. I mean, we watch a crime be stopped.
Yeah.
But that's the extent of it. And I was really surprised that what they do instead is this sort of prefabricated is the wrong word. It's what they do instead is this early slasher aesthetic, where we are watching someone follow Brie with a kind of la 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 music background thing out of De Palma or even Pino Donaggio kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's wrong. It's wrong for the format.
I know.
And it's fascinating.
I love it, though.
No, it doesn't not work, right? Because now we know what it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's what really... Because I watched it for the first time only a couple of years ago.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so this was not like a film that I knew in film school, or, obviously it's not a film that I grew up with. My parents would be very weird if they showed this one to me. But so I only watched it a couple of years ago, and I was really immediately struck. I mean, you're right to say that it kind of hits a few of my interests with the female character, and then also this like kind of weird thriller mystery side of it. I mean, those tend to be some of my favorite films and the kinds of films I want to make, and so I think
the acuity speaks to me, speaks to you, of you to me somehow. It's like that sense of focus is the kind of thing you tend to go for.
Yeah, no, thanks. But those scenes, it's funny watching it back now, because there's a few scenes in there that I feel like are almost painful to sit through because they're actually quite boring. But the stuff that really resonates with me is obviously the stuff between Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland, these sort of character moments, that great scene where she's got that sequined black dress on, and it's quite a long scene too between them. It's really, really fascinating. But then the other thing that really stands out to me are these like thriller, almost kind of thrasher, like the use of the the man sort of walking on the ceiling, and that whole, like, drawing that in, and putting the camera behind the sort of bad guy with a long lens, as if it's his POV, but then also he's in the shot too, and it's some of these elements that are really, like, creepy, just, like, inherently creepy, but in a way that somehow then manifests itself as a character study of her, which, I mean, none of those elements are congruent, really.
No, I mean,
but it works.
Yeah, there are elements that Bob Clark would then take for Black Christmas and invent the slasher movie.
Right.
But those same elements in this context are just a further acknowledgement, like, we're not the only ones watching her.
Yes.
That it's about study, that it's about her being observed and analyzed constantly. And
the that's also interesting.
The conversation she has with Klute are also similarly, like, he keeps asking key questions that she won't answer, and they're innocuous questions. She's just not interested.
Right.
Which is the other thing that really fascinated me this time on this watch, was just, she's acting all the time.
Yeah.
And it's only when she's acting for the audition that we get the sense that she's not that great.
Exactly.
She's a much better actor when she's unconsciously doing it, and the way she mimics everybody around her.
Well, I mean, and she even, as the character, discusses that in her therapy sessions, because she says how, I mean, the question for her is, why does she keep turning tricks, and why doesn't she concentrate on her acting career? And she gets so much power, and she obviously is quite good at it, at the acting that she does, while she's turning tricks, and she's really turning a trick on Klute for almost the entire movie. Maybe
absolutely.
arguably, I don't know what you think, but I mean, maybe even up until the end. Who knows? I don't know that they're going to have a happy ending, like a life together.
Well, the film seems pretty ambivalent about that.
I think so.
It's weird. I still don't know that that having watched the entire movie again, I don't know that I've seen Bree Daniels. Like, I don't know that she's in it.
And that's definitely...
Even in her therapist, she's performing.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. And I think that's also, another reason why I respond to it, and kind of what I started off saying, that I don't think you have opportunities always, as an actor, to play those kinds of roles where you can remain mysterious. And, I mean, that's what, to me, you leave the theater then talking about that character. I mean, we're still talking, we can talk about her for an hour, we can talk about her for longer, because you're kind of... every time you watch it, your reading of it will be slightly different, I think, depending on where you're at in life and the sort of context of what's happening. And that's what truly makes an iconic character, I think, is not being able to penetrate that character fully and understand. So I think you're right that we don't quite see her show up. Although I do think that in those scenes with the analyst, I think that we hit some type of nerve about what kind of character she is, and that she likes performing. I mean... Yeah,
maybe that's it. It's the theatricality of her delivery.
Absolutely.
That's still her pushing herself upwards, inflating herself for the benefit of analysis.
Sure.
And her choice... I mean, even the fact that she chooses St. Joan for her audition piece, because it's an existing play.
Yeah.
So presumably she brought it in.
Yeah.
Although did she give it back? Did she give the script back? Is that scene, or is that a different one? I can never remember. There's a couple of these.
I can't remember either. I mean, I just watched it. The other actress who comes in after her, though, I think brings in her own script. So yeah, I think she must have brought it.
But it's one of those things where it's a tick that tells you so much more about the character than it's supposed than she would want us to know.
Absolutely,
as observers.
But there's very few moments of that, I think, where the film is even giving us an indication of what she is, because it feels like, the whole film is almost unraveling from her performance of a performance. Do you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's about the classic character study dynamic is that you can't run away from who you really are,
right?
And that's not what this is.
Right.
Someone is coming at her.
Yeah.
And who she is irrelevant.
Yeah.
In terms of the thriller mechanics, she is, and maybe that's the other thing that feels so radical, is that in any other movie she would be in the first act, deliver a line of dialogue, and leave. And like in the Law and Order scenario, she would be call girl number 2.
Absolutely.
And instead, we stay with her and we see everything that she goes through, and we see how she isn't just a victim and how she isn't just a statistic.
Yeah.
And her friends are, which is the cynical bit.
Well, and she doesn't know what role to play too, because I think when she goes to see her friend and her friend is drugged out, I think it's. Again, I was reminded this morning that when I watched it, that's the moment when she decides to go get high and then kind of go back to the world, because she almost feels, I think, that, well, no, that's the character that I'm supposed to be. So what is she, like, you know, she's still kind of figuring out that element, but we don't ever we don't get a conclusive answer as to, there's no kind of epiphany of Brie Daniels' character where she's like, and now this is, I have changed. We're seeing her change start, I think, but I don't know that we ever see it happen.
I was thinking in a commercial version of this film, or more, although I suppose at the time that was actively commercial to make a movie with these two actors in this situation. But now there would be much more of a moralistic streak imposed on it, just because that's where we need stories to go collectively. That would be her wake-up call. That would be the moment where she throws away whatever paraphernalia she has, and instead she just goes out and gets fucked up. I mean, that's how she has to process
reacts to it. No, absolutely. And I really do find that radical, and it's strange to me that you know, that we haven't kind of progressed from 1971 when this film was made, that it's almost become, we've regressed, I think, in terms of what we allow our characters, our leads to go through, and that there isn't this kind of big epiphany. And there's this sense that, you know, if we don't have that epiphany, that we can't learn, but we do. I mean, we do. I find it's very insightful, even though I don't relate to her, you know, other than that she wants to be an actress. Maybe I relate to that part. But I don't, you know, relate to being a prostitute. I don't know if I have to actually say that.
I think you can phrase it as, I don't relate to her immediate reality.
Yeah, I don't relate to her immediate reality, but I certainly learn about myself from her, I think.
Well, that's the attraction, right? I mean, watching people in lives that we wouldn't lead is the other thing about drama. So. It's empathy, and it's understanding and illumination. But it's also, I was thinking about this. There are movies like Heaven Knows What, smaller film, where you can actually spend time with an addict. And I mean, it's semi-autobiographical. It's based on the woman playing the addict. It is her own life,
right?
More or less fictionalized, but you can do that in a low-budget film where the stakes are minimal, and where people can, you know, they won't be horrified at the idea of Julia Roberts, you know, crunching up math or something. Or you can do it in something like Breaking Bad, where the entire first 2 years of the show are about false glamour, and then the last 4 are about revealing it.
Yeah.
But you need to have a game plan. You need to have a guiding intelligence that tells the viewer that this is what that kind of movie is.
Yeah.
Or what kind of story it is.
Yeah.
And you can't do it with movie stars, because people won't buy it. They just somehow, or not even people won't buy it, those films will never get made.
They won't get made. I mean, the thing, the phrase movie star, I think, is the problem. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know, because I didn't live in the 70s, so I don't know what it was like for Jane Fonda, because she was a movie star. Mm-hmm. I'm right in that, like, she was.
Yeah, well, she'd already made Barbarella. Yeah, you know, in terms of exposure and she was a known
entity,
and Henry Fonda's daughter. So all her private activity, her personal life stuff, became tabloid fodder.
Right,
but she was absolutely established and notorious when she did Klute.
And I also heard that she actually did Klute because she needed money, because she had given her money away to the leftist anti-war, which I found really shocking, that she was in need of money, because, you know, but obviously that her political endeavors, which she's so, you know, known for, especially from that era, that her response to that was then making Klute, playing like a person who obviously had to figure out a way to make money. I don't know, I just found that funny that she did this as a response to making money, but then she really turned it into something that has become so iconic, won her first Oscar for it, deservedly so, I think.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's a performance like nothing else at the time, I think, which is the other thing.
Yeah. I was on a train of thought, about movie star, I think, too, and whether or not in this day and age a movie star could be this raw, vulnerable. I don't know. I mean, I don't see that many performances like that. Do you?
No.
You watch more movies?
Not as often, no. I mean, I think the environment was such, too, that in the 70s that was being produced.
Right.
You know, like Roland's Woman Under the Influence was 3 years away.
Yeah.
There was
3 years away, wow.
Yeah. Klute predates it. It's, although Cassavetes was working with her then already, and she was, like, Faces had, I think, been shot the same year.
Right.
But there's a sense that that was the time when the culture was ready for it. And what Fonda does is, I mean, it's totally method. She's immersed herself completely into it. You even the fashion choices, which are alternately really interesting and really weirdly stylized for 1971 New York, because it's a little bit disco forward, and they're not there yet, but they're coming.
But I feel like that type of character, I mean, they make, I noticed all these little nuanced when you watch it a million times, but that a character makes a comment to her like, oh, so-and-so, meaning her other friend who was a prostitute, used to dress like you. Right. And then it cuts to that this prostitute is strung out and clearly has been going down a darker path, where I feel like that type of breed, Daniel's character, would have spent the money that she made turning trick, not necessarily paying rent or, buying food, but that she would have bought sort of fashion. So there is this kind of artifice as well to it, which kind of goes inside with her performance elements.
Yeah, and it just feels like all of those tics are expressed in Fonda's, her entire being. It's one of those performances that doesn't, I mean, it obviously very much is acting, because she's channeling all kinds of stuff, and the character is a little ticky and a little physically expressive, but when she's shuts herself down, you feel it. Like, you actually feel the work happening, which is weird, because nobody else, like Sutherland is just standing there in so many scenes, just demonstrating a totally different kind of acting approach, and it puts what Fonda's doing into larger relief. It actually makes it look better and more interesting simply by holding the screen. Yeah, she's doing incredible stuff.
I think you're right that the juxtaposition between how those two people are approaching their character really speaks to the character themselves. I mean, I think that it's true that Donald Sutherland is much more restrained and maybe more methodical, whereas she feels as though, and I think there has been talk that she ad-libbed, or that she was her in character saying those things in the therapist.
The therapy scenes are famously just largely improvised.
Yeah.
And also a few other decisions she made even before shooting started. Apparently, I just found this out, she decided the character should have a cat, which is why we don't see the cat for the first half of the film.
Oh, apparently.
Wow. They just didn't find the right one, or they were looking... Bree would have a cat.
That's so true. She has a cat in the scene.
Yeah, I think you only see it twice in the entire picture.
The apartment itself, in the scene where we first see the cat, has changed. They've cleaned it up. I mean, it almost looks like an entirely different apartment. It's sort of after she goes through this drug withdrawal that Klute helps her through. But yeah, I that's so true. She doesn't. Where was the cat?
Yeah, it opens with her feeding the cat. The first scene, she comes home, she feeds the cat, she licks the spoon, so it's obviously just tuna or something.
Right.
And I spent the rest of the movie thinking,
where did that cat go? What's a New York cat? It's independent.
Sure,
it's going out on the streets. Had friends, and yeah. And
they don't use it as a scare. They don't use it as a shock. No. Like any other movie, the cat would be dead.
Yeah, that's true.
After the assault on the apartment, that's true. Sort of symbolic attack on her.
What did you think? And I mean, in a way, this is spoilers for people who haven't seen it.
No,
but
we presume, ideally, people will have seen this at some point.
But what did you think about the fact that we so clearly see who the killer is, the bad guy is?
It doesn't even try to hide it, does it?
It doesn't try to hide it, and it doesn't even... It feels like it's interjected somehow into the story. I mean, I think it's a really fascinatingly edited movie. I mean, obviously shot incredibly by Gordon Willis is another reason why I love it. But it's also really very smartly edited. But that is very noticeable when we see who the murderer is, because there's kind of no indication. And I was trying to figure out, why did they decide? Was that in the script? Was that something that happened in the edit? Because it would have seemed too like gotcha if they had waited until the end to reveal. But how did that affect your viewing? And did it, or
it's funny, I remember
enhance it?
I remember thinking the rhythms were weird when they did it, but it just felt like it was another one of those experimental moments in the 70s where they tried something and it didn't quite work.
Yeah.
But it also the classic A-B plot story of a thriller, right? Like, you need to cut away from the characters to give the audience a breather and let them process whatever information they've learned.
Yeah.
And here they don't actually do that so much as just give you other information.
Just tell you who it is. And
it made me wonder, for the longest time, why the movie would do that. And now I think that if you follow along the postulation, he said pretentiously, if you follow along the postulation that it's about a character who would be first act fodder.
Yeah.
And then never seen again. Instead, by following her, we need to know why she's still alive and what the point is. And the point is that the killer needs to know where she is so he can eliminate the last link in the chain. That's what this is about. He's cleaning up. He's using the missing persons investigation to clean up his own mess. But
it's so interesting because they don't use that introduction of his... Well, it's not an introduction to that he's... It's just flat out like, oh, here's... By the way,
this guy is the killer, and this is what he's doing all the time.
And it's 25 minutes in, and then we kind of leave it again for a while. But it's not even done in a way to build suspense. Because, you know, sometimes they do that in thrillers where they'll show you, you know, obviously like a Hitchcock or somebody, they'll kind of show you, you know, what the actual thing is, and then it's just about watching someone solve it or why or whatever. But it's not done in that way either. It's really, I think, to announce the fact that it's not a thriller, so don't almost prepare for that kind of satisfaction. Yeah. That was maybe my reading.
It's just another way to make people wonder what they're really watching.
Yeah,
possibly. Yeah. But I don't know that
and stay active and
yeah. I don't know that it's intentional. That's what's so fascinating about it, is that these are scenes that would go in another movie. They would make sense in a different type of film.
Yes.
But this isn't that sort of film.
No.
I mean, it would be like, to pick up the De Palma reference, it would be like Dress to Kill, where you find out what the character's been up to in the scenes where we haven't seen him.
Right.
It deflates everything, but it also, in this case, just keeps you on this weird footing where you're not totally sure what it is you should be paying attention to.
Yeah, and again, I find that utterly fascinating, and that the film is really successful on that level, which I think is really hard to do.
Yeah, it shouldn't have worked.
No, it shouldn't have. And ultimately, it you know, for some people it didn't. I read that New York Times review from 1971. Did you read it?
Yeah, there's a lot of hostility being thrown around.
There's a lot of hostility. I mean, thankfully for like Ebert, I read, you know, his, I thought was, he got it. Yeah. He got it in the way that I want people to get it. But yeah, that New York Times review, I don't know who even the reviewer was.
Canby? I think it might have been Canby.
I can't remember. But yeah, they just did not. They did not like it. They wanted a thriller. They didn't want to have to think.
Yeah, and you can dismiss it as a tawdry, sleazy look into New York, because that sort of kind of is possible, that reading of it, but it's deeply unfair.
It's deeply unfair. I mean, there's moments where like the jazz music kicks in. I don't mean the sort of leitmotif that's throughout, which I think is amazing. I love that you know, that one Klute sort of
quasi-detective music.
Yeah, I love that. But there are some moments where you know, the jazz music kicks in, and it, you know, you can maybe sort of see that someone would get impatient and maybe have that reading that the New York Times did. But I also, I don't think that that's giving the movie enough credit. Yeah. It's quite a smart movie.
Whereas now I can also just bliss out on the locations. And just, you know, that's a New York that's gone.
Yeah.
It isn't even changed. It's just no longer there. The tenements and the Lower East Side stuff, and the suggestion of Harlem as kind of a refuge for the heroin addicts. I don't know that works anymore.
Yeah, no, I don't know if it does either. I mean, the funny thing to me, too, though, about that is that for New York being the backdrop, it's not a New York, like, crime movie. The city is not a character in this film the way that it is in some of those other kinds of films that it's almost referencing as well. You know, and you can tell very much, I think, watching it, that those apartments are like it's a studio. And you were saying to me earlier that
Pakula built Bree's apartment in a. It is. I'm going by the video.
Okay.
By the documentary.
I didn't know either.
Pakula built Fonda's apartment, built Bree's apartment on a soundstage, and it had a working everything. It was you could sleep there if you wanted to.
Right.
She had the option. I don't know if she actually did.
Right.
But it was just a way to sort of box in that character in a strange way.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, again, not to segue back to my own film, but
that's what this is for.
I did use a lot of the still images from Klute for my production designer, and because I think that it's, you know, it walks the line of being very naturalistic but also stylized. You know, I think the whole movie, but in its production design, in its costumes, as you brought up, in its lighting, I like that. I mean, I think that's necessary. I don't like one for one so much. I don't respond to this is reality. Yeah. I like a little bit of something, and I don't like it when it's, you know, overly stylized as well. So I just like the sort of feeling of I don't know, of artistry in these lives. But that apartment is really an interesting I think, place for shooting. It's just like a box for Gordon Willis to light. It's great.
Yeah, I can't wait for a Blu-ray edition just to see what it's supposed to look like, because I've only ever seen it in VHS and DVD, and they just don't do justice.
It's so
to
dark. I mean, his lighting is so dark in general, so I wonder in the Blu-ray if it will be...
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah.
Preserve the levels.
Yeah.
Get somebody to properly restore it.
Great. Yeah, I had read as well just the other day when I was researching this a bit that about a quarter of the way through the filming, that Jane Fonda said she didn't think she was right for the role and that he should have hired Faye Dunaway.
Really?
Which why I found that interesting was because one of my favorite actresses is Faye Dunaway, and I think that she's kind of entirely misunderstood as an actor, and I really respond to her, and I also obviously really respond to Jane Fonda in this. So I found it interesting that she had said that Faye Dunaway would play this role. I could see it. I don't know how I mentioned that to my partner, and he was like, no, I can't see that at all. Faye Dunaway is much too glamorous, and this character is supposed to be so gritty. And I thought, well, Faye Dunaway, though, has that kind of vulnerability, that kind of raw, like, almost unlikable.
Yeah. As soon as you said her name, I thought, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure she could have done it.
Sure.
But I wonder if, Fonda's take is so indelible, obviously.
I agree.
Can't see past it.
And to me, how could you think that you weren't right for this role when you so clearly are this role? But
Right.
I found that interesting.
But of course, if you're playing a woman who is an imposter, you're going to start to develop imposter syndrome.
Oh my
She'll
God.
just convince
You're
herself
so
that she
right.
shouldn't be doing it.
You're so right.
Dunaway, I think, would have just been too big.
Yeah.
In the panic scenes, in the terror scenes, she goes big. That's her.
Goes Dunaway.
Yeah, she does, and she's great at it.
No, she is really great at it.
In Chinatown, you just can't look at her for the pain that she's putting out.
I know. I love her.
This is a net positive.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. No. I just. Jane Fonda. It's funny though too because she's not small in this movie. She's not Dunaway big,
Mm-hmm.
but it made me think when you said that because she is such a presence, Jane Fonda, in this movie. Again, like not naturalistic, but naturalistic. Like she just has this quality of I don't know. I'm in awe of her in this movie.
Yeah, my take on Brie this time around was that she's someone who can't figure out why she isn't happy. Mm-hmm. But she knows, she just can't articulate that it's because she's not getting the acting gigs, because that would mean that she isn't good at it, which would mean she'd have to do something else. And she's just spending so much time investing in her own misery. Like that's the addiction. The addiction is tricking, that she keeps falling back on that because it gives her the sense of control over her life that she's missing. She even says this. She articulates it and then immediately dismisses it.
Yeah, no, she does. I mean, I don't know. I think when you know that you're performing in life, when you can't separate that high or that rush that you get from almost manipulating people into their perception of you, knowing that on the inside would be, total misery. I mean, you would hate yourself. I mean, I think that's kind of why she can't be happy in a way, is because she's a very cynical character. Yeah. It's rare that you see females, I think, that get to be that kind of dark.
Yeah. I think at the time it was more welcomed.
Yes.
Everything was in flux. You could experiment with all sorts of characterizations. I still think the most subversive thing to do now, or not now, but the most subversive thing to do where the film ends would be to pick up and have Klute and Brie be supporting characters in some pedestrian big chill drama where they fully assimilate. She's fully assimilated into the suburbs, and she's gone to Pennsylvania, and they're still there. And it did work out, and she can't stand it, or she can, and that's what she can't stand.
Oh, I would love to see that movie.
Maybe an American Beauty kind of situation where she, this is exactly how. Or God, like 20 years on, they have kids, and they've got teenagers, and it's the whole thing about how you'll never understand your parents is.
Then you become,
there's so many different ways to take her story forward, which I think is what's so great about the characters, that she's so rich that you can see any of these paths or she's back in a week, like she says she might be. And
well, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I also read that she was seeing Donald Sutherland during the making of this film, and that he was in love with her, and that she broke it off because she said, you know, I can't be with just one man right now. I've got to be with many. And so you even think of that in terms of the Brie Daniels character, that, yeah, ending up with Klute in suburbia would be like the worst nightmare for not only apparently Jane Fonda, but also for Brie Daniels, and seeing where that kind of led. Because again, it's almost as if because they couple in the end in a way, but it's ambivalent, I think, too.
And it's not like Donald Sutherland would have been a square, responsible life either. No. As a romantic partner, I'm sure he was pretty interesting.
I know. I worked with Ross of Sutherland a couple of summers ago, and you know, you never want to just sit down and say, like, tell me everything about your father, but he actually does talk about, you know, his dad quite a bit, and some really incredible stories of that man and in that sort of era too. I won't tell any of them except for this one that I think he would be okay with, which is that he once took an ambulance from Montreal to Toronto with a woman that he was seeing, I think a French woman, I can't remember who it was, but because they like couldn't find transportation in another way, so he paid an ambulance driver like an enormous amount of money, and they actually like went with the sirens on and drove from Montreal to Toronto. So I feel like
cut an hour off the trip. That's very it's a very sensible solution.
It's a very sensible solution, but one that probably only someone like Donald Sutherland could choose to do. So extravagant, romantic, and odd, but
ill-advised, but really swoony.
He's very swoony, I know. So tell me more. But that's my Donald Sutherland insight.
Yeah, we've never met. I've never interviewed him. He stretches out like this incredible shadow over cinema, really, from the 70s and 80s and 90s. I interviewed Kiefer and Rossif a day apart at TIFF this year.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because Kiefer was here with the film he'd made with Donald, with Forsaken, and Rossif was here with River.
Right.
And it's really, like, the two of them are nothing alike, but they're completely alike. It's
interesting. I don't know Kiefer at all. Like, I've never met him. And,
they're both obsessed with process and really interested in minutiae.
Yeah.
And neither of them is particularly enthusiastic about talking about the relationship, because, of course, you know, like, why would you? If you're an actor yourself, you don't want to be in a shadow.
Sure.
But of course, Kiefer and Donald are together in this film, and he said that they had spent more time together making the movie than they had in his...
Oh, that's interesting.
For a set period, like a window of time, it was the longest time they'd spent together.
Okay, I've got one more Ross of Sutherland and Donald Sutherland story, which I feel like he wouldn't mind me telling as well, but this is a great one as well. If you've met Ross, which you have, you know he's very, very tall.
Yes,
strikingly. Just strikingly, strappingly tall. Lovely to look at. And he told this story in his Rossif way about how his dad, which obviously is Donald, sent them miniature ponies for Christmas one year. And so I don't even know how you send a miniature pony, but that they were all too small for they're all, I guess, kind of tall on the Rossif side of the family, and they had to send them back because they were too tall to ride these miniature ponies.
Oh, God.
It was like, my dad took me to Chuck E. Cheese when I was at my birthday. I wasn't sent...
Yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking, like, what sort of strata do you exist in where you can send people ponies, and then where there has to be a process for taking them back?
Exactly. Like, I feel like it's a different, life.
It's the stuff of a Weezer lyric, you know.
It really...
I returned a pony for you.
Yes, exactly. I loved you so much to get you a pony, but then it didn't fit. Yeah. No, I think that...
But he does exist in a different sphere.
Yeah.
Donald. Even now, like, now that he is this phenomenally imposing figure with the white hair and the beard and the Hunger Games films are perfect casting for him.
I know.
But to look at Klute and think, oh, that's where you're going to end up.
I know. He does seem, Donald does seem a little bit terrifying to me as well, or imposing. Yeah, I think is the word. But Klute and Don't Look Back.
Don't Look Now.
Don't Look Now, right. Don't Look Back.
Like the whole run of the 70s stuff.
Oh, man. I mean, that is the ideal kind of, I don't know, man or character actor or something. But he he was something else. They don't make him like that either. But yeah, I would love to see him almost go back to like a really kind of, I don't know, like lead role with a little bit of heart.
Yeah. What would you even do with him now?
I don't know.
He's so fixed in that weird space of being the Grand Line or something. I mean, you could do something. I suppose you could do something like Remember with Plummer or Orlando. But then you're playing weak, and that's not what we want from him either. I want to see him just explode.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I haven't seen him the work that he did with Kiefer, but I would love to see him work with Rossif. Like I think that because I think Rossif actually has some qualities of young Donald Sutherland in him that haven't quite been maybe fully realized on screen, but that would be a cool, I think, pairing in some kind of film. But I'm not going to write it.
Well, I mean, we could spitball something.
Yeah.
Send in your
yes, please.
Send your pitches to the Twitter account.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So then then there's the final big wrap question, which is the one that I ask everybody, which is, is there anything from either the film or from Fonda's performance that you've leaned on or riffed on or stolen or how?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's obnoxious to talk about really great works of art in relation to your own work, because I also think that then people look to draw parallels that they might not see that is there. But I've stolen a lot from this film and the film that I just wrote and directed. Even as I've said, just showing photos of the production design and the lighting. So obviously stuff along those lines. But I think it also just taught me a lot about these kind of converging kinds of films, that it's a drama, there's a bit of romance, there's a thriller aspect that doesn't quite live up to the genre. And I find that really, really fascinating. I think it's also a very it honors the female character somehow in this movie, and not in a way that is typical. She's not like this strong, kick-ass woman. She's just a really full, rich, interesting, beguiling, mysterious, sometimes unlikable, sometimes likable character. So, that I've stolen. I've tried to steal Jane Fonda's acting. I don't know if successfully, but I'm open. Again, send in your ideas for Donald and Ross, and then send in your scripts where I can play Jane Fonda roles.
Yeah, I was going to say they'd be great in a remake of The Sting, but there's no female lead.
Yeah. It's like, no. Yeah.
That's a flaw. And that was made 2 years later. Like the creakiest, clunkiest kind of movie, and intentionally so. Yeah. But, yeah.
No, very, very...
Klute was a very different movie.
Klute was an extremely different movie. Yeah.
And even with again, if you have the DVD handy, watch the featurette. They clearly had no idea how to sell it. Like, Warner didn't know what they were selling. They made this entire thing about the seamy New York City locations and how the city eats people and depresses you. Fonda has a line, another one of her interview lines is about how, I lived here for a while and you come back and you're so stressed right away.
I know.
That's what I love about New York.
I know. I was like, really? You're stressed out by New York? And as she's saying that, they're showing these, like, great, gritty, looking scenes of Harlem. Yeah. Definitely watch that featurette. It's pretty cool. I could watch more of those for sure. Yeah. I was going to say something, now I forget. But
was it about The Sting, antiquated films, convergent films?
Something. I'll think about it on my way home. Yeah.
Well, the antiquated film thing, or not the antiquated, the convergent film idea, because it's not a hybrid.
No.
There are hybrid films.
It's not a pastiche, or even
they're deliberate choices.
Yeah.
But this feels just like a bunch of ideas that are somehow souped together and turn into something that is its own thing.
I would be really curious to know what the script, like the true script for this film was, and how much they did in the editing, and how much they did on the day with the actors too. Somehow I think it works. But I also think it works as a slight critique of that kind of thriller genre, with this detective who isn't quite able to solve the crime. I do feel like there is a reading of the film that really lends itself to that too. of the time as well. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And
Did we talk enough about her hair? I thought the whole thing would be about her hair. I'm glad it wasn't.
you can talk about it.
No, I don't want to.
If that's something you think you'd want to steal or borrow.
No. No. Yeah, her wardrobe in it, sure.
Kate had pointed out that there is a proto Julia Roberts Pretty Woman look in there.
Yeah, I guess like the high boots, is that the thing?
Yeah, I think so, in the short skirt and the high boots.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's
the more aggressively prostitute-y clothing.
Yes, I was going to
like
say.
the choices that don't look like she's trying to fit in.
Yeah.
Aggressively prostitute-y. I don't think
that's not a phrase at all.
It shouldn't be.
Yeah. No. You know what else is interesting about the film? I mean, you don't have to include any of this, and I just was thinking as well, but I mean, it's oddly like a comment, there's a lot of different things happening in it, because I love that scene too right off the beginning where the camera is dollying past all of the actresses waiting, and they're all being kind of judged. I mean, in terms of like backstory or setup in terms of what this woman's reality is like, that has nothing to do with the story whatsoever. Or that scene where she then goes to meet the director or whatever. Those are kind of elements that are just really nice shadings to the character, but have nothing to do with kind of the plot, or we never kind of go back to that either. And I don't know, I find that really kind of interesting too.
Just the daily life that she's coming from or going through.
And just as sort of like, I don't know, commentary on what it is like to be a woman somehow.
And even that shot of all of them lined up in the agency, it's shot with a tight squeeze. Like it looks different from everything else, a little bit more anamorphic.
It very much looks different. Yeah, no, it's shot totally different, but
just to be a little more alienating.
Yeah. I miss. It's a good movie. Let's go see it.
My thanks to Nadia Litz, whose new film The People Garden starts a 3-day run at the TIFF Bell Lightbox tonight, Tuesday, May 10th. If you're in town, check it out. It's moody and weird and very much her. Oh, and if you haven't caught Nadia's performances in Monkey Warfare and Big Muddy, they're both available on iTunes. You can find Nadia on Twitter at Nadia Litz, all one word, and you can find Klute on DVD from Warner Home Entertainment and for rental and purchase on iTunes and Google Play. We'll work on that Blu-ray campaign. Maybe Criterion is interested. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review on iTunes, that would be lovely. This week's call sign is Studio Apartment. Thanks for listening.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.